In the rolling meadow country of the Bergisches land, farmsteads sit scattered wide across the hillsides, white-walled houses set among green fields and stands of trees. Over the generations, some of them grew into small hamlet clusters. One mark of these settlements is the wayside cross, visited each year by the farmers' field processions. This particular cross, raised in 1871 on the Erlenbusch land, stands beside a bare tree on the grassy hillside, at the edge of the hamlet of Ingeldorf, near Curtin. A dirt path curves up from it toward a cluster of white farm buildings with red-tiled roofs, gathered around a bare dirt courtyard. On farms like this one, far from any town market, much of the equipment a household needs is still made by hand, at home, the same way it always was. Here in the farmyard, two neighbors have come together to build a fruit-picking ladder. One of them takes his place at the shaving bench, called locally a Fegebank, to prepare the rungs. He clamps a fresh length of wood into place with a foot pedal, then works the drawknife toward himself in long, steady pulls, rounding each length of wood and tapering the ends to fit. The piece is gripped between a movable clamping head and the bench top, held tight by that same simple lever and pedal mechanism, worked with the foot to keep the wood dead still while both hands stay on the blade. Close in on the clamp itself, you can see exactly how it grips. The jaw closes down under foot pressure alone. No bolts, no fastenings, just leverage holding the whole piece in place. The middle of each rung, where a foot will stand, is left noticeably thicker than the ends, the drawknife shaving away thin curls of wood with every pull until the taper is even on both sides and the surface underneath runs smooth and rounded. These rungs are never sawn to shape. Sawing would cut across the wood's grain and weaken it. Instead, they are riven straight from solid timber, splitting along the fiber to keep its full strength. Wood shavings pile up thick around the shaving horse with every pass of the blade, more collecting with each finished piece he sets aside. Meanwhile, at a large chopping block nearby, the second man roughs out flatter rungs with a small hatchet, striking again and again along the edge of a split piece to knock off wood in thin chips, rotating it in his hand to work each side down flat and square before thinning and leveling it so the drawknife work that follows can move faster. Every so often, he carries an armful of long, split wooden poles past the shaving horse to restock the pile, then gathers a few finished pieces up off the ground to check them over. Behind him, the pile of finished rungs on the ground keeps growing, each new piece added to the stack the moment it's checked over and set down. It's in this rough shaping that the difference between the two types becomes clear. Round rungs for the body of the ladder, and flat rungs with wider tenons at their ends, needed wherever the ladder requires extra stability. Work like this was traditionally saved for winter, after the autumn planting was in and the threshing done. Preparing stakes for pasture fences is still, to this day, a winter task. In earlier times, farmers also used the season to lay in a stock of harrow tines, rakes, besoms, and shovel handles for the summer ahead. All of it was once done on the barn's threshing floor, but since this farm switched over to modern livestock keeping, that threshing floor is gone and the work has simply moved outside to the open dirt yard in front of the farmhouse. There, both men work side by side, one back at the shaving horse, the other still at the chopping block, while finished rungs pile up in the wood shavings underfoot and split poles lean stacked against the building's dark timbered base, waiting their turn. Some of the leaning poles are already split down the middle, others still round and untouched, and a loose hatchet lies forgotten in the shavings near the chopping block, waiting for the next hand to pick it up. A third man crosses the yard now, carrying in a long, unsplit wooden pole balanced across his shoulder, the raw material for the ladder's two side stiles, about to begin its own turn at the tools. The flat rungs are smoothed the same way as the round ones, though they need no thickened middle. Their angular profile already gives them enough strength on its own. The craftsman first draws a straight-bladed knife across the clamp's surface, then switches to a second tool, a scraper with a curved blade, working it back and forth to bring the flat face down to a fine, even finish. For every rung, the wood is always oak, chosen for its resistance to breaking under a farmer's full weight. And because these treadwoods are already dry before use, once they're driven into the still green wood of the ladder stiles, they lock in tight as the surrounding wood dries and shrinks around them over the following months. For the ladder's two long stiles, a straight-grown young fir from the farm's own woodlot is chosen. The round pole is split lengthwise down the middle with a two-man frame saw, one man on either end pushing and pulling the blade through the wood to yield a matching pair of halves. But a pole under the saw has to be held absolutely still, and for that, farms once turned to the two-wheeled field cart, the long pole laid out across its bed for support. A clamping block is fixed to the end of the cart bed with iron C-clamps, and the notch cut into its middle, which cradles one end of the little tree trunk, can be tightened further with a simple wooden wedge driven in alongside it. Already, the first few inches of the rip cut show pale, freshly exposed grain where the blade has only just begun to bite. Before the stiles are fully cut apart, the insertion holes for the rungs have to be marked out, and marked so precisely that once split, the holes on both halves still line up at exactly the same height. First, two men stretch a chalk line taut along the length of the round trunk and snap it, leaving a straight black mark down the middle to fix the true direction. Then, a folding ruler measures off the spacing along that line, each point tapped with a small nail, while a second man kneels alongside checking every distance. The gaps are kept even at 26 centimeters. Even the smallest inconsistency here would leave the finished ladder crooked, its durability compromised before it's even built. Each marked point now has to be bored straight through the trunk so the holes match on both sides once split. The men lift the pole off the cart entirely and carry it across the yard to a proper drilling station, resting it across two low, sturdy sawhorses instead. The drill can't be driven with enough force at the low height of the cart bed. To hold the thick end of the trunk steady while drilling, they use the same clamping block as before, now fixed in place on the sawhorses with an iron pin driven through a wooden securing wedge. The two sawhorses are set just far enough apart to carry the full length of the pole without it sagging in the middle, keeping the whole trunk level and steady for the drill. With the hand brace, the drill bit is driven into the wood using nothing but the weight of the worker's own upper body leaning forward into it, the handle turned in a steady rhythm. To get a matching fit for both ends of a rung, once the stiles are split apart, the spiral bit has to stand perfectly vertical. Any lean throws the two holes out of alignment. The bore runs straight through, top to bottom, through the round wood chips spiraling up the twisting bit as it cuts deeper. The tip has to land exactly on the marked point. A nail is pulled from each mark just before the bit goes in, the second man pointing to the spot before the drill is set. From there, it's the wide-swept edge of the auger that does the real cutting, lifting full curls of shavings out with every turn until it breaks through the far side and is drawn back out. Hole after hole, the two men work their way down the length of the pole this way, the same motion repeated at every mark. Around the sawhorses, curls of pale shavings pile up thicker with every hole that's finished. The holes made this way come out relatively narrow enough that they'll need to be opened up further before the rungs can go in. Cut away for a moment to a finished fruit ladder already standing tall against a dark silo wall, stretching up well past the eaves, the camera tilting slowly up its full length. This is what all that careful measuring is for, because not every ladder gets this treatment. Rougher versions, the kind you'll see leaning against a fodder silo with no such care taken, skip the fitted holes altogether. Their treadwoods are simply nailed onto the outside of the stiles. Back at the sawhorses, the men are still working through the row of holes, one by one, pulling each marking nail just before the drill goes in, then moving on to the next. It's faster than what we've just watched, but it comes nowhere close to the strength and safety of a properly fitted fruit ladder. Once the holes are bored, the pole is carried back to a set of tall wooden sawhorses to finish the cut. The helper ties an apron strap around his waist, a wooden block fitted to the front, the way wheelwrights traditionally did, and braces the block against the end of the pole to hold it steady with his own body weight. Working the frame saw, its blade set crosswise, driven up and down vertically in front of the body, the other man follows the chalk line and the pre-drilled holes straight down the middle of the trunk, the blade slicing directly through the center of each bored hole, splitting it neatly in two. As the cut moves along, the sawhorse beneath tends to shift backward, so a third man holds it steady by hand. The closer the saw gets to the cart end, the wider the two halves spread apart. In this final stretch, the trestle actually lags behind the saw itself. And because the end gripped by the clamping block juts about 10 centimeters into the cart, that last stretch of wood is out of the saw's reach entirely. So instead of cutting it, the two halves are simply pulled apart and snapped free by hand. The two halves pull apart cleanly along the grain, with barely a splinter out of place. With the pole split into its two stiles, they're lifted onto sawhorses, flat drilled side facing up, ready to receive the rungs. A shell auger, a spoon-shaped bit, is turned by hand into each pre-drilled hole, widening it from the inside, the worker bracing his legs against the stile as he twists the tool back and forth, shaping the hole to take the conical tapered end of a rung, curls of wood peeling out from under the blade with every quarter turn. Unlike a screw-tipped auger, this one is sharpened only along its two long edges, which taper upward in a wedge, and a second tool with a T-shaped handle is brought in afterward to refine the taper further, twisting back and forth to carve away just a little more wood at a time. The cutting edge is only turned in as deep as needed, just enough that the hole matches the thickness of the rung end, no more. Because the oak treadwoods are already dry while the fir stiles are still green, the rungs lock in tight as the surrounding wood dries and shrinks around them over time. When it's time to pick up the hatchet, the craftsman first gathers the loose hanging part of his apron at the corners and tucks it behind the bib, so that if the flat hatchet ever misses its mark, it lands harmlessly between his spread legs instead of into them. With it, he chops at the ends of the stile, working it down to a sharp taper on both sides while the other man holds the stile steady across the sawhorses. Often, a blacksmith would forge an iron cap for these tips as well, nailed on for extra durability to give the latter a firm bite into the soft ground of the orchard. Then, working together, both men flip the stile over and take up long-handled peeling spuds, pushing the blades hard along its length to strip off the last of the bark and shave down protruding knots, leaving the wood smooth on every side. Watching the rungs go in, it's clear just how much skill this kind of farm craftwork actually demands. When the holes are made correctly, the rungs can be driven home with a hammer straight to the full thickness of the stile, standing exactly square in the middle of it, one man tapping each rung with a wooden mallet to check it's seated straight before moving to the next. At both ends of each rung, space is left for the stronger flat pieces. These are what keep the whole ladder frame from warping or twisting once it's set down on uneven ground. Finished on one side, the row of rungs stands upright out of the single stile, and the men bring the second stile in, carefully lining its own row of holes over every protruding tip before starting to tap it down. Finished, this fruit ladder, with rungs fitted into only one side, looks almost like an oversized rake. It runs about 3 meters long, and it's put to work every autumn when the damsons are ready to pick, a fruit found in every orchard across the Bergisches Land. Those plums get cooked down into a spread, and if dried in the oven afterward, they'll keep almost indefinitely. When the second stile finally goes on, it reveals just how carefully the whole job was done. The free ends of every rung slide straight into their matching holes on the first try. From there, the long stile only needs to be driven home from above, hammer blows moving down its length as the sawhorse beneath is shifted from one strike point to the next. The tapered holes fit the rungs so precisely that not one of them pokes through to the outside. Once every rung is seated tight, the ladder holds together without a single nail, solid enough that, once raised against the farmhouse wall, one of the men climbs straight up it on the spot to prove it, testing every rung underfoot before it's trusted on the steep valley slopes where plum trees liked to grow best. Even after every rung is driven home, one man goes back over the whole length one more time with the mallet, testing each joint by feel before he'll call the ladder finished. And using this same careful, hand-built method, some farmers spent their winters making larger ladders too, for work like repairing the timber-framed gables of the farmhouse itself.